Hi, everybody. Hello, FileMaker DevCon. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes? All right, awesome. All right, it's right about that time, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is prototyping, why FileMaker is the only tool you need. The purpose of this session is to change the way you think about building apps. So I'm going to go through different tools and the development environment, many of which you may already know, but it's the approach that's going to be different. This session is about prototyping, building something usable fast, aka building something high fidelity in a matter of hours, not days. So before I get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am. So professionally, I'm a senior team lead at DB Services. I manage a team of 7 full-time FileMaker developers. Some of them are here in the front. We got a big team here. I'm an advocate for the FileMaker platform every day. I introduce individuals and companies to the platform on a regular basis. I'm certified in 11 through 18, and I have approximately 10 years of FileMaker experience at this point. DB Services, just a little bit about us. We're a sponsor here at DevCon. We've been the FileMaker Growth Partner of the Year for the last 2 years. We publish monthly articles many of you are aware of. I'll talk a little bit more about those later. And we are the creators of FM Quick Start, which is a free CRM that you can download. Personally, I've been married for almost 4 years to my lovely wife, who's here supporting me. Been renovating a 1960s home. That includes pool upkeep, which some of my coworkers also share, so that's something that I'm kind of into if you want to geek out, and that's going to come up later as well. I also like to make cocktails, read, camp, do outdoor sorts of things. Okay, let's jump into it. So I'm going to first define prototype, and I'm going to kind of contrast it to wireframe as well. So a prototype is a preliminary model of something from which other things can develop. So it's sort of your first take, it's your first build, and it's a great starting point. I want to separate this from wireframing, which is, I sometimes use them interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. A wireframe would just display elements of a page or a screen, and it's for planning purposes. So this session, we're going to mostly focus on prototyping. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about wireframing. So you want to build an app. Where do you begin? That's always the question. So normally you could just jump in and start coding, which is a great place to start with FileMaker. It's fast. Just start building the app. Put it together, jump into layout mode. That's what FileMaker gives you out of the box. Alternative to that, you could spend a bunch of time planning and writing things down and creating design docs and 30-page requirements. And then you could start building and have a very laborious process. The third option is you could build a prototype. So you could figure out what is the smallest deployable unit. I like to call that the minimum viable product. What can we deploy? And prove that this is going to work, or show people, even more importantly, show people how it's going to work. So the top 3 reasons to prototype. The first one is very few people build apps in their lifetime. This is just a fact. So this applies whether you're a consultant building for others, building something for yourself, building something in-house. Very few people still have built apps or of any kind in their lifetime, and building software is fundamentally a creative process. Developing apps is a creative process. And if you've never done it before, or your end users have never done it before, and they don't realize the power of the collaboration, there's going to be sort of a learning curve there. Oftentimes, developing an app can be dramatically more complex to achieve your desired transformation than maybe you originally thought. When you take a prototype-first approach, it allows you to start that interaction early with the users. You can show them something, you can get live feedback. I like to say that the minimum viable product is always a prototype. You can always build something that doesn't quite work, that people can play with, and see how it's going to work. So when should you prototype? Let's look at some key indicators that you should be thinking about a prototype. The first one, I guess the first and second, is there's no workflow today in the business. There's no workflow in the team, or it's all paper-based. So it's all sort of written down, maybe on forms. I'm going to lump spreadsheets in there as well. If it's a bunch of spreadsheets that are just kind of cobbled together, that's essentially paper. It's just digitalized. So it's not really paperless. Without a prototype, you have to rely on conversations or physical observation to convey the point and gather requirements of what is needed. So you're going to talk to users, you're going to interview users, you're going to figure out what the problem is. You're a problem solver. You're going to figure out what the problem is through talking to people. But your first point of feedback is going to be when you first show it to somebody, or more often, the first time someone actually tries to use it unguided from you is when you're going to get your first real feedback, like, hey, I'm stuck, this doesn't work, that sort of thing. Let's hope that that first point of feedback is not you going live with a full product, because that's not good. So prototyping brings the feedback loop a lot closer, allowing you to be a lot more agile. I'm going to talk really quickly here about a proof of concept. I'm going to tell this story. The second half of this session, just so that you guys can kind of be aware, is we're going to look at prototyping. We're going to prototype together, and I'm going to show you the process. Before I do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about a proof of concept, which is a different type of prototype. So I like to separate workflow prototypes from proof of concepts. A proof of concept is, let's see, will this work? Can we connect to this API? Can we connect to this technology? Is this actually going to work? There would be a lot of this in like IoT. Can we make this work? Is this sensor going to work? That sort of thing. A workflow prototype is more showing users how the new system is going to work, and the flow of screens, maybe putting together something. This is what it's going to look like on the iPad. This is what it's going to look like on our mobile devices. This is what it's going to look like on our workstations. Matthew 25 Ministries is a nonprofit providing disaster relief and humanitarian aid throughout the US and the world. The donations that they get of physical goods are sorted in their warehouse and then redistributed to the poorest of the poor and disaster victims across the country. They have a 168 square foot warehouse processing center for these donated goods. And it's a kind of a unique setting because these are just pallets of donated goods. So they're not particular, they don't have SKUs, they're not going to be resold, but they are bundled and they need to be tracked. So they have a traditional inventory system, something that they bought off the shelf. But they bought this new IoT forklift system. So it's a smart forklift. You can essentially tell it which shelf to go to, and it will automatically drive there and go to the location and pick up the goods. The forklift driver can simply scan a barcode, and he'll know where he is in the warehouse, and he can also scan one to drive the equipment. It's pretty cool. So Matthew 25 came to us, and they wanted to know, can we do this through an iPad? So can we tell the driver where it needs to be stored? He scans the pallet. He takes it to where it needs to go. So just quick visual representation. This is the aerial layout of the warehouse. So there's 14 rows, 19 sections, and then each of these vertically, let's see if I can get my mouse here. Each of these vertically has a slot you can see on the far right. So there's 6 slots inside of each of those sections. So the first prototype we built was pretty great. We took FileMaker, and one of the unique challenges of this was representing blank space. So we needed records for blank space as well as occupied space so that users could see what was available and what was not available. So we built this pretty cool prototype, and it expanded each of the sections. You could then look in the different sections and pick where you wanted to place each of the pallets. This was great, but it didn't work so great in production as imagined when we finished the prototype. So fortunately, we'd only spent a handful of hours, less than 10 hours, on this prototype. We put it together, we kind of ran through it, and immediately we felt, and the client felt, that this wasn't going to be quite what we wanted. So because it was a prototype, it's very easy for us to start over. The next thing we built was an aerial representation of the warehouse, and this is in FileMaker, and each of the rows is represented. The red spaces are all taken, and the green spaces are available, so the user can quickly see how much of their warehouse space is occupied. This would be mostly occupied. Users can then tap on any section, and it pulls up a nice card window here where they can see what's stored in the warehouse. So this was version 2, which brings about, I'm going to talk about a couple of the lessons learned from this prototype. So after every project, we like to reflect on lessons learned that can be brought into the future. So what did we learn from this one? As a developer, you're always trying to make things robust and future-proof. You want to avoid refactoring code just because something changes in the real world. So one thing we had relied on was this principle, and we'd made this expanding, collapsing, excellent prototype that was very flexible, could easily be changed to different configurations. The problem was the warehouse rarely is going to change. Those racks and shelves aren't going anywhere fast. And so our adaptability was kind of wasted. And we had performance issues with that were sort of tied to that as well. So we started over. Another lesson learned with this is test physically. If you're in a physical setting like this, and the barcodes, we kind of laid that out, test physically. Even if, get up out of your chair, you're sitting there developing at your computer, get up out of your chair and maybe set up something that's similar to the real world so that you can test as you're building, if you can't be there in person. And then lastly, don't be afraid to start over. It's a great thing about prototyping is you can always start over, backtrack, and it's a lot faster if you haven't invested building out an entire system. So why use FileMaker? I'm making the case here that FileMaker is pretty much the only tool you need as a FileMaker developer, and I truly believe that. Over the past few years, I've done over 20 prototypes for different projects, different customers, different settings, different industries, and I've always used FileMaker. I've never needed to use anything else. The first reason is I don't have to learn another tool. There are plenty of other great pieces of software out there, but I'm experienced in FileMaker. I'm a FileMaker developer. So utilizing the tools that I already know how to use is the first benefit to myself and the process. Second thing is it's nearly as fast as most tools to do a lot of what you need to do. Sure, there are certain things out there that might be slightly faster, but in a business app setting, in a workflow, in a workplace innovation setting, you have pretty much everything you need at your fingertips. And then lastly, and most importantly, it creates a functional foundation. So whatever you build does not have to be thrown away because you built it visually only or in some other piece of software. You can take it, you can use it, and it serves as a foundation for whatever you are going to build. So let's talk about some of the features as a FileMaker developer that you have at your disposal that make it a great tool. The first thing is there's a lot of no-code features. FileMaker Go does not require code. You can load it on your phone. You can get something on the iPhone in a matter of moments. Most of my apps I simply airdrop to my phone, and I have it there for testing immediately. In other development environments, that would require a lot of work. The themes within FileMaker are one of the things that make this speed possible for building apps in hours and not days. You can already have a theme set up, and we're going to take a look at some of those themes here in a moment, but having the theme set up with all the styles preset for you, powered by CSS, is one of the things that makes this entirely possible. FileMaker is multi-user. We kind of all take this for granted, but all this record locking and saving and managing all of that, we don't have to write a single line of code for that. That's all part of the package. Find mode is another thing that you don't have to do a bunch of coding to write queries and that sort of thing. You can just let users use find mode and they can easily access their data. So all of these are reasons why FileMaker, powerful things that FileMaker has that require you to do no code. And then there's a couple low code things as well that I'll mention. You got single lines of code for animated transitions on Go. That can be very helpful for showing a prototype flow screen by screen. You have window management, so you can create the card windows and different windows very easily with single lines of code. Okay, let's jump into the demo. So I'm going to walk you guys through my starter solution. This solution is a blank slate. You'll find it with the session materials for this session. And it's what you want to use if you're starting from scratch. So you can reference my starter solution, but I would highly encourage you to create your own starter solution. If you're going to create something from the ground up, there's no reason you shouldn't load it with all the tools that you'll normally be importing from some other source. And then after we walk through the prototype, I'm going to show the elements, and then we'll sort of we'll walk through a prototype as well, and I have some of those requirements here. So let's hop over to that. Let me see here. Going to switch to my demo. Okay, so wish the session materials. Find our demo file. So this demo file is loaded with 4 key components. It's got custom functions, it's got scripts that I use in almost every file, and it's got some powerful themes to choose from, and some basic navigation. So right now we're looking at the iOS loading screen. So let's break this down briefly. The first thing I'll show you guys is the custom functions that I use in almost every app. So when you create your own starter solution, or you use a starter solution, I would encourage you to load it with the custom functions that you use day in and day out as a developer. So a couple of them worth noting in here. Pretty much every solution I will build will have error trapping, so I've got FM error message already loaded in here. I've got some other generic things like format phone for formatting phone numbers. There's some other, I'll let you guys sort of explore some of the other ones. I will point out I have a couple of SQL functions that save time, the most powerful of which is getting a preference with execute SQL. This allows you to quickly pull any preference from your preference record from anywhere in the solution without having to build relationships. I always find that very useful and a key to building applications quickly. As far as scripts is concerned, I have a number of scripts in here. So you'd have some of the ones you expect, like a startup script that loads a couple of globals and organizes what device to launch. I have a closing script where I can run some closing things. Something in here that's a little bit unique is I created this developer-only script, and all that it does is it works with that closing script to make the current layout the layout that the file will close on. So if you want to quickly switch it to a menu and run that code, it will instead launch your solution at that layout. I find that very helpful as well. And there's other ways you can do that, but that's an important thing to do when you're closing a file locally. Save front tabs is one that I use all the time. You put this on a tab control, and it can save which tab is front when the user leaves the screen and comes back, so that they're not constantly having to tab through. And then lastly, I'll mention I have two methods of saving data temporally in FileMaker. So if you want to enter some data temporally and then let the user cancel and throw away their data, which I'll demo here shortly, there's two ways you can do that. You can do it through putting all that data into global fields and then clearing those globals if they cancel. Or you can do it through not letting them commit the record. So I've got code here for the committing and code for the global management. OK, let's take a look at the theme. So I mentioned before that themes are one of the most powerful parts. Themes really let you control and build apps really quickly that look great. So this is the iOS 12 theme that I've set up. And as you can see, I have a couple of templates down here. But I've done a lot of work to set this up so that it reflects iOS 12 Apple guidelines so that this looks great on the iPhone especially. So this theme has each component that you would normally have. We have some buttons here across the top, a couple of tab bars, and then down here to the left we have the fields and various text sizes. And then down here I have some additional controls like segments and a search bar. This search bar is obviously anchored to the right of the screen. And then I have down here, we have some button bar styles that you would normally reach for on iOS. So that's one theme. If you take a look, we got some other themes as well. We have an old iPad theme. We have a dark version of that same iPad theme. We have a desktop theme, which is targeted towards desktop, and a dark version of that as well. So these are just a few themes that I've created. I would encourage you, if you have a theme you like or themes that you've used in the past, go ahead and load some themes into your starter solution so that you have something to run with when you're building applications. Okay, I'm going to walk you through the rest of this demo file. So it's pretty straightforward. We have a desktop view here. There's a couple screens here that have basic navigation, and this is another key to building apps quickly. If you just have a couple screens to run with, you can pretty much start building apps immediately and just start customizing straight out of the gate. So this is just a list screen, and then I click on this. This is a detail screen. This is a very common trend in applications, and there's some tabs here at the bottom for related data. And we even have the ability to add something, as I was saying before, globally through a card window. And here I can enter data, I can cancel and discard the data, or I can add a note. So that's all there. Pretty much every desktop application will have some use case for that. Looks Looks like my screen is a little washed out. Can everybody see the contrast on this? Okay, all right. Let me see if I can fix that real fast. I'm just going to go ahead and turn up the contrast slightly on the display, and then maybe that will help out a little bit. Is that better or worse? Worse, all right. I guess we'll have to roll with that. There will be a recording of this, and it should come out pretty well. So, on the iPhone side, we also have the same format, where you might have an iPhone. I'm going to shrink this down with tabs at the bottom, and then list of data here. You can click on a record. You can see detailed information, a series of fields. You can edit this and save the data. So this is just the very basic navigation that you would want for an iPhone, and allows us to jump right into it. Okay, so with all that said, I'm going to show how this file is actually used. Let's jump back over to Keynote, and I'll run through the requirements here that I have from a project. So this is from a real-life project, something I'm working on. The requirements are essentially the users collect data on their iPhones at a regular frequency. There's a lot of use cases for this. Data will be collected from various instruments or places throughout the system. So there's different instruments, and then data will be collected for those instruments with different data sets for each instrument. The unique requirement here is users need some flexibility to configure different types of data collection based on each instrument. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work there. What that means is we're going to let the users actually say what data they're collecting and how they want to collect it. And so that's sort of a proof of concept. We're not going to have the users use layout mode. Instead, we're going to let the users create their own forms and specify what fields they want on the form and how they want to enter the data. So that's something that's maybe a little harder to do, but we're going to show the client that's possible through a prototype. Last two requirements are, hang on, got on the wrong slide there. So the last two requirements are data will be visualized on a dashboard, and instruments should alert users when data will be collected. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take the demo file and go ahead and do that really quick, do this prototype really quickly. So we've got some remaining time here, and I'm going to walk you guys through different techniques and things that allow for building apps quickly. So the first requirement was that users are going to collect data on the iPhone. I'm going to use an example here. I'm going to extrapolate this a little bit from the real project to protect privacy here. I'm going to use the example of my pool. So a pool has a lot of different moving parts. It's got a motor. You have to test the chlorine and the acidity and all the different levels fairly regularly every few days. You also have to check on the equipment on a regular basis. So this might apply to many different business settings. I'll let you guys sort of use your imagination for that. But we're going to go ahead and use the pools as our example, because that will allow us to have several different types of data collection, and we'll let the users choose and set up the different forms. So we'll set up one for monitoring the water and the temperature and that sort of thing, and we'll set up another one for collecting data about the motor and the equipment. The cool part about this is going to be data entry on the iPhone. This could eventually become something that was more IoT related. We're not going to go there as part of this prototype. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is focus on this ability to let the users create their own forms. So I'm going to go ahead and say each form is roughly 5 fields. So we're going to take this prototype and go ahead and add a number of fields. One thing I'm going to point out here is I rarely use this new field down here. A lot of times I'm working in managed database. But if you're building something quickly, these new tools down here to quickly add fields and drag them off the layout onto your screen and just apply your style can save you a bunch of time. So in this instance, I need to add labels because we're going to let the users choose what they want to call each of the data collection points. So I'm going to go ahead and add 5 labels just quickly here. Something that you can do as well to speed up your process is utilize obviously copy and paste, but I actually program those to my mouse keys, which makes it really fast as a programmer. So we've added 5 fields, and what I was saying before is you can now take fields here on the left. You can tell FileMaker where you want the label, how you want it positioned, vertically or horizontally, and throw that on your layout immediately. That can save you a bunch of time if you're just quickly prototyping. So I do use that tool a lot when I'm prototyping. Okay, so back to the requirements. I'm going to go ahead and create 5 fields here. Let's go ahead and clear off all this data, all this information. One thing that I think I borrowed this from somebody, but it's really helped me out over the years, is using these little spacers in layout mode. If you don't know what that is, you can create a spacer. This is a 16 by 16 spacer object. It's hidden in browse mode. We don't want users to ever see it, but it allows you to build really great looking layouts without doing a whole lot of work. So I have a 16-point gutter here, and if I want to drag fields onto the layout, I can use that spacer object. Obviously, my layout isn't quite big enough, so let's go ahead and fix that, and then I'll show you. So you can use the spacer to quickly position your objects and keep everything completely consistent. You can use other things like the grid, but the spacer object is a lot faster and a lot more flexible, in my opinion. Okay. So let's go back. I am actually going to jump into Manage Database here because we have to add a couple tables. My advice when it comes to prototyping is focus on 1 to 2 tables. And you want to try to avoid making a bunch of extra stuff. So we're really going to just hone in on here on something called a form, which is where we're going to collect our data, and then something called a form type, which will allow us to drive that form. So let's go ahead and set up the form. The form is going to have 5 different fields. I've already got some fields here. I'm going to go ahead and repurpose a couple of them so that we have 5 fields. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Go ahead and get rid of these extras. And I have 5 labels. So what that's going to allow me to do is, on this screen, we're going to call this data collection, just so that we can keep it straight. Oh, I got rid of my spacer object. So let me go borrow one from another layout. Okay. Let's bring on the fields. So these are our 5 fields. And we're now going to delete these labels and let the user instead choose their own label. So that's what these label objects are for. Let's go ahead and drag those in right like that. Now, since the unique requirement of this was the user needs to be able to specify what are each of the fields called, I'm going to style these like their labels. So I'm going to take my label style over here. So in my theme, these are our different components for text, and we have one for field label. It's already set up for us. If we wanted to change that, we could go back to the primary theme screen and change that across the entire solution. But we need to create another theme, another style for fields that are the style of theme. So this, when you want to take something from a text object to a field, they can't share styles. So you have to set up your own style. And I would say if you're not using styles, you should learn how to use styles, go through the help documentation, get caught up on that. Styles will save you a lot of time and allow you to change things really quickly if you don't like the look. So this field is now styled like this text object. We have to save it as a new style. I'm going to call this field label style. And then what I can do is I can just select all these other labels and change the style. Oop, I'm going to shift select them. Okay, let's take a look at our form, how it's coming together thus far. I'm going to clean it up just slightly. Go back to browse mode. So there's our form. It's getting there. I obviously want my fields to anchor to the right and to the left. So let's do that real fast. Change the anchoring. It's looking pretty good so far. So now I can enter in my style. So when we're collecting data, the first piece of data would be pH. That would be the acidity of the water. The second thing would be chlorine. The third would be alkalinity, stability, or stabilizer. And the last one would be temperature. put those in there. Now, I noticed that this contrast isn't great, so I'm going to change the style of this, make it a bit darker. And just with 2 clicks, save changes to current style and save changes to theme, I've updated all the styles on this layout and all the layouts throughout the solution. So here's our form. Since this is an iPhone, there's also an edit screen that we need to update. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this onto that other screen. So iPhones have read-only and data entry paradigm. One trick that I'm going to show you is when you copy objects in FileMaker, one thing that can be frustrating is wherever you click in the background and then you paste, that's where your new objects come in. So across screens, it can get really messy really fast if you're moving things. So one trick is when you first enter layout mode, you haven't clicked anywhere, FileMaker will paste the objects exactly where they came from their previous layout. So you can just leave layout mode, go to browse mode, come back to layout mode and paste, and you'll drop it right where it was. And you can see if I now toggle, these are the same. That's extremely helpful when it comes to moving top-tier navigations across layouts. You can get those off by 1 pixel or 2 pixels. You can use the same technique in hotkeys to just quickly go through layouts, enter browse mode, go to layout mode, and paste it directly where you want the top tier. You can get that done in a matter of moments instead of having to use the inspector to constantly be checking, is it at the right place on the screen? Okay, so here's our prototype so far. I'm going to go ahead and make these not enterable in browse mode on the read-only screen. And we'll make sure that they are enterable on the data entry screen. So what we have so far is a list. I'm going to call this data collection as well. We'll call this the pool data. So we have a list of our records here, and then we have a form, which we've quickly created, and we can now edit the form. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how this would go to a phone. All I do when I'm testing this is I airdrop this to FileMaker Go. So I'm going to go ahead and see everybody who's in the room who has airdrop on. All of you lovely people out there. I'm going to go ahead and mirror my phone here on the screen. Whoops. Of course, it's going to crash because it's a demo. Okay, I guess I won't be mirroring my screen. So one thing has to go wrong in each demo, so that's the one thing that's going to be wrong. But what I would do is I would airdrop this to my phone, and it will immediately open in FileMaker Go. So if you didn't know that, that's a great way to test. We'll go ahead and give somebody the demo file. So you just airdrop it, and then you can accept on your phone, and it immediately opens in FileMaker Go. This is a really fast way to test and get off the ground. Okay. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this demo and show a couple other things. So we may not get through the whole proof because we only have so much time left, and I want to leave time for questions. But let's see if we can run through a few more tips and tricks. Okay, so on the iPhone, a couple of the things that are already included is the ability to search. So I just wanted to show this real fast. This is Quick Find. If you type in here, it'll quickly search records and cancel. This is, again, leveraging the power of FileMaker's find mode, actually Quick Find in this case, to not have to do a whole bunch of work. That's 2 lines of code. It's very straightforward stuff, and it works on any table. So going back to my requirements, one of the requirements was once we collect this data, we want to see it on a dashboard. So let's go ahead and visualize that. And I'm going to use a really powerful technique to create a quick dashboard here. So let's go in and make a dashboard screen for our demo here. And we're just going to make it in the menu context for now. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate my menu and call this my dashboard. And what I'll do real fast is I'll go ahead and set up this top tier down here so that this first icon is data collection. I like this database icon for that. And then this is going to be our dashboard. Another thing that I actually didn't know for a while, so I'm just going to throw it out there, is you can reorder tab bars by clicking and holding if you need to rearrange the thing. Sometimes I forget that that's there, and it frustrates me because I made my button bars in the wrong order. So we're going to make dashboard 1, data collection 2. We have got these other tabs here that we can use later. So this one is just going to use FileMaker's single step. This is what I was talking about, a single step to go to a layout. And all that it will do is come to the current layout, which is the pool data list. And then this one is going to go to our new layout. So let's go ahead and go to layout, and we'll go to the new dashboard. Okay, I'm going to go ahead now and set up that dashboard, and it's really only going to take me a couple seconds. So I duplicated my menu here. This is just a menu of buttons. Let's go ahead and get rid of all this stuff and change the background to white. We'll go with this light body here. Okay, so this is going to be our dashboard. We need it to have the navigation so that we can get back. So let's go borrow that from our other layout. We actually need a bottom nav. This is 56, and we're probably going to need it. We probably won't need a top nav. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this navigation, hop over to my dashboard, and create a bottom nav part. Bottom navigation parts are very helpful on iOS because they don't zoom and they stay fixed to the screen, so they're excellent for navigation. We'll go ahead and make one real fast. And I have a style already set up for bottom nav because it includes like a line in some of the colors that I want. Let's go ahead and make that 56. And what I was saying before, if I go back to browse mode and then layout mode, I can paste this. Actually, my layout was the wrong size, so it didn't work. Okay, so this dashboard, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this dashboard. Let's just bring over something that says dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and borrow some of these buttons. I'm again going to use my trick, which I think I just use it all the time, of browse mode, layout mode. And we're just going to call this dashboard. So one of the oldest tricks in the book is to take something and use it as part of your screenshot. So very powerful framework I'm going to introduce you that's great for dashboarding is called Charts.js. It's open source JavaScript charting that you can embed in FileMaker. So they have a bunch of different things, different types of charts. If you go to charts.js.org, this is in my resources as well. It's in the slide deck. You can choose from various different types of charts here. So if you go to samples, you can see kind of whatever chart you want. We're going to go to a multi-axis line chart. And you can see there's some lovely rendering. And you can kind of get different ideas like that. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dashboard is going to have charts. I'm going to screenshot this. And I'm going to include it in my prototype. Just like that, I created a chart in 3 seconds. There's nothing wrong with doing this if there's components or things that you know you're going to want that you just want to lay out and show users in your prototype. There's nothing wrong with just screenshotting and laying it out like that. So there's our dashboard. And now we have, let me go ahead and anchor that. I could worry about the aspect ratio if that was bothering me. But now we have a dashboard and we have a list screen, and we have 2 modules already going in our application. So that is actually one thing that I use fairly frequently is, again, if there's something that is already built or it's just going to look something like this, it's going to be a list of stuff. Another thing that I like to use, which we'll use on the dashboard as well, is with the FileMaker, one of the newest features, which is current found set portal. This makes making portals without relationships really easy. You can just do a current found set portal, and you don't even have to create records, and it can just represent a list of data. This is like creating placeholders in a wireframe because I didn't have to create a table, I didn't have to create a relationship, and I already have a list of data that I can represent. Let me get my anchoring correct. I'm now going to put that on the bottom, and we'll keep this at the top, something like that. So let me anchor this. There we go. So now we have a dashboard which has a list of instruments. Down here is what this would be, and then this would be the data collection at the top. And again, we have our list of data. All right. I'm going to go ahead and end the demo there. I've got a few more slides here, and then I want to make sure there's time for questions. Okay, I'm going to talk about a few things. Again, I've done this many different times, so I want to talk about a few things that do not save you time, and then I'll talk about some things that do save you time. So the first thing that I would say does not save you time is not planning. You still need to plan. And you should still probably create a wireframe of what your prototype is going to do. Skipping that step will not save you time, just jumping right into it. The next thing is not organizing your scripts or your graphs, not taking time to name fields. All of that you do to make an application that's readable, easy to use, and easy to develop in. Don't skip organizing your scripts just to save yourself a quarter second. It's going to feel like you're saving time, but you're really not saving time the minute that you try to get back into the layout mode or the manage layouts or the graph. And then also, commenting your code. The primary reason you want to comment code is to, in the future, you can reference back what you were doing, what you were thinking, what the functionality is. Skipping commenting code isn't going to save you any time. It's still better to comment your code, and I would suggest even writing your comments before you write your code. A couple things that do save time. One of those is getting it right the first time. You do this through communication. So excellent communication with your users. I just told a story where we didn't get it right the first time, so that's okay, but the more that you can get it right the first time, the less rework, that will actually save you time. So again, planning, maybe putting together a wireframe. I will take a moment to mention all of my wireframes are pretty much text-based. I don't do a lot of visual wireframes. I like to do a visual prototype, but I'll sort of wireframe in written form what the functionality is going to be. So when you wireframe, when you get it right the first time, that's what's really going to save you a lot of time. Utilizing as much native FileMaker as possible will also save you time. So when you're in the prototyping mindset, what you have to think about is how to build things as quickly as possible. Normally, let's say you might build a picker or a selector, create a couple different screens, some scripts. What if you just used a pop-up menu or a drop-down menu? Yeah, it might not be the most user-friendly when this is a real application, but in the short run, you can show users, hey, you're going to be able to pick what form you can choose from here. It's going to be a beautiful picker in the future, but let's just make it a drop-down for now. So don't forget about those native tools, things that are going to save you time versus building out a bunch of extra screens. And then the other thing that's also can be hard to do, but you want to skip non-essential screens and tables. So it's very natural. For instance, if you're building like an order screen, you might want to put a customer at the top, and you might want to run off and create the customer table. And then you might want to create the customer addresses and all their contact methods, and now you're in this, you're over here building all these different tables. You now have to build a bunch of screens to support those tables. What if you just built the essentials, which is the customer field on the order, and you left it as just a field? In the future, the application will have a CRM, and it will have contacts, and it will have all of those things. That's great, but you want to focus in on what are we trying to prototype, and keep blinders on, stay really focused on that as much as you can. If you get away from that, you're going to end up using a lot of extra time. Okay, wrapping up here, we got a few more minutes. A couple of resources that will save you time that I'd like to make you aware of. DB Services publishes a technical article every month, and a lot of these include a free demo file, which is essentially a proof of concept. It shows how to connect to an API, how to connect to a system, how to build something. A couple of our latest ones connected to SurveyMonkey. We have many different integrations and APIs, connecting QuickBooks, that sort of thing, directly through APIs. Those can serve as proofs that, hey, FileMaker can do this. This is how it works. You can look at other places as well just to see, have other people done this? Did somebody write a technical article that proves that this can be done? FM Quick Start is something that I've used a lot in prototyping as well. It's a fully unlocked CRM. It's free. It can be, all of these are links in the slide deck, by the way, so they link off to the resource. But FM Quick Start is a vanilla application, a vanilla CRM that's fully unlocked for developers. Elemental is created by Digital Fusion. Daniel over at Digital Fusion created it, and it includes an entire repository for icons, and he's also adding a repository for charts soon. So it's a great resource for visual elements in your application. He recently published it. It's been a huge success. I just wanted to make you guys aware of that as well. Charts.js, we talked about that. And then lastly, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Matt Petrowski. I use his iOS native looking tab panels in my demo file as well. And what those do is they create tabs that look like iOS panels, but they're actually FileMaker tab controls. I can show that really fast here. If you go to the demo file theme, what you'll see in the top right is a couple of these little tabs, and I have one down here as well. This is a FileMaker tab control, even though it looks like a button bar. And that was done through his free tool, which I've linked. But what these are, I can show you if you don't believe me. These are tab controls, and you have all the ability that FileMaker gives you to control tabs without having to build a bunch of scripts or transitions or sliders that you would normally have to do if you were using, let's say, button bars and sliders. Okay, we have just over 10 minutes for questions, so I'm going to go ahead and open the floor. If you could speak up and ask your question, I will then repeat your question for the recording, and then I'll do my best to answer it. Yes?
Once you've done your prototype, and then you've got a file that's in effect working to the basics, do you then start with a fresh file and copy and paste that stuff and the tables that you've actually using? Because obviously there could be a lot of creation and deletion in your prototype.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really want to rely on it.
So the question was, when I'm done with the prototype in FileMaker, do I then make a clean file and port over what's usable from the prototype in case there's been some creations and deletions, et cetera, throughout the process of making? The answer to that is no. I normally use the file that we built. If there is some cleanup, just go ahead and usually doing that is faster than porting everything. I guess that's kind of your call. It depends on how much you played around and tried things. There might be a point where you would want to do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that, but I would say that's sort of just a time call on your end. One of the benefits of prototyping is you can better estimate what is it going to take to finish this. What do I have to do now that I've proved it can be done? I've showed users. I know how their initial feelings. You probably have a better idea now what the final product is going to take. All right, other questions? Okay, if there aren't any other questions, do you have a question? Go ahead, Chris.
What if in the end you want to do web direct? Still take this same prototype in the browser?
So the question was, what if you wanted to do WebDirect? Yeah, that's actually a great question. I would say when you're prototyping, you should just focus on one technology. If it's WebDirect, that's great. I've done that before. You could focus on Go. Our scenario here was for Go. You could focus on desktop. You could focus on WebDirect. Focus on one, because if you focus on 2 or 3, you've now created hours of testing for yourself, extra work. So I would say focus on one. If it's WebDirect, you may want to do that, because building for WebDirect will then probably translate better to Pro and Go and that sort of thing. But yeah. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I'll be available here at the front, or you can find me throughout DevCon. Thank you all for coming.